Hi everyone. I've had questions before about different kinds of pens, especially related to the types of paper you should be using. So in general, you of course know that, well, if you've watched my videos, I say all the time, use very smooth paper. So this is my Kelly Crates dotted paper pad. But there are brush pens that are different from each other. So this Kelly Crates pen and most brush pens we letter with are water-based. And that means they're kind of like watercolor. But they have different, different volumes of liquid that comes through the tips. What do I mean by that? Okay, so this is my Dream pen that has two tips. Very similar to most brush pens that you would use. Another water-based brush pen would be the Ecoline brush pen. So automatically you see it is a bigger barrel and the tip is slightly bigger, but the most significant difference is the amount of ink that is released when you write. The tip is a lot softer than my Kelly Crates Dream pen. I don't know why I'm writing the word water. But you will also see that so much ink flows through the tip that your regular paper, which even might be, heavyweight like mine, will warp a little bit, or it will kind of be wavy. You can even see a little bit of bleeding because of the amount of ink that is released. So when you're working on a project, you can still use this type of pen, but the paper is what makes a difference and can change everything for you. So let's grab a piece of Canson watercolor paper. And my trick with these kinds of pens is to actually use the reverse side of the paper, not the regular side that you would paint on. I just painted on this side with watercolors. I flip it over, it's much smoother, and these pens work on the Ecoline pen in particular, work on this paper much better, I guess you could say. Now, the other thing about this type of brush pen is the way the ink flows I'm going to zoom in. The way the ink flows when you put pressure on it is quite dramatic, so you can get a nice gradient. If you find, let's look closely at this end, you see when this dries, you will probably see a dark line and a light line. If you have any issues like that on this kind of paper, then what you want to do is you could draw your letters a little bit bigger, but you would release pressure more slowly, and that way you're going to avoid, so I'm going to slow down on my underturns, and that way, when I release pressure more slowly, you will probably not get that line that marks that transition so strongly. You should see a softer line. And what you can do to practice this is simply do underturns. So let's do my normal underturn, just like that, kind of fast. And because it's kind of fast, my release is very low and late. And can you see that line forming there? So we're going to change things up, and I'm going to release even a little bit earlier. And that way I'm going to avoid that line at the bottom. So naturally, this is my release. I actually have quite a late release. So what I mean by that, let me just grab my handy red pen. Here's my transition triangle. And I tell everybody to release pressure on the pen as you move downwards at about this point. You could start a bit earlier, and then you can see the difference in these triangles and the width. This one is much narrower at at the bottom. So I am releasing earlier and making that transition more gradual, and that triangle, I'm moving it up a little bit on the left, which actually is more appropriate for traditional calligraphy. This is my natural style, totally works, but it doesn't work with this pen. So what I'm going to do with a brush pen like that is super juicy, is I am going to make my release earlier and slow down, and just make sure that I am writing at a size that accommodates this soft tip. So paper matters with the Ecoline. This isn't the only really juicy watercolor pen there is. The other one would be, you know what, I could only find my Winsor Newton Black, which isn't good for a demo, but I wanted to mention it because I don't know where my other ones are right now. My studio is a bit of a disaster. I wanted to mention it because it has the same kind of juiciness with the ink flow rate is very similar to the Ecoline. All right, now it's hard to see with the black, but it actually, yeah, I don't think you can see it. There is a slight gradation and gradient of color, and it is very, very smooth, but it is black, so it's hard to see. But if you have the Winsor Newton watercolor brush pens, then they would behave very similarly. Let us talk about now, aside the brush pens that are not water-based. So there are brush pens, which actually are, I don't really recommend lettering with for projects, but you can certainly use them if you want to. They are alcohol-based. So the two I have here in particular, I do have a Sharpie and I do have a Winsor Newton alcohol-based brush pen. Why don't I recommend them? Well, first of all, I do find their tips behave quite differently. I mean, the Sharpie's not too bad. So let me do this. What the difference between the result in this pen and your water-based pen that I just used is this brush pen, the ink is opaque. So you will not see a gradation in color. It will be just a solid color through and through. Of course, I mean, with the light upstroke, you will see it might be a little bit lighter, but that's just because it's dry. But, look what happens. With the alcohol-based pens, you are going to bleed right through. Now, you know what? When I was doing this, I was actually practicing, and I thought, oh, I am going to put something underneath, which I didn't do. So let me grab a piece of paper to put this underneath so I won't ruin my table, and then I'll have to remove that mark. Okay, so put the top on. Putting the top on is important. Storing them tip down is important because they are going to dry out, and that's what you're seeing here with this lighter line. So they can be fun to letter with if you're lettering on non-porous surfaces and you want a permanent ink. You can do so, but they do dry out very quickly, so you have to be careful the speed that you're writing, and also, you know, the surface and the bleed through. The bleed through can be prevented if you do want to work with these pens. Again, if you go back to your watercolor paper. So here's my watercolor paper turned upside down. This is two tips. It's chisel tip, and this is the alcohol Winsor Newton. And I want you to watch actually the underturn with this and look at the tip. Do you see that? If you struggle with that kind of tip, what I'm going to do to accommodate that soft tip doing that is I will actually move my pen to the left when I start. So I'm going to go up here and push down. And I find these actually really challenging to letter with. So let's draw a U. And that tip behaves so differently. And I'll start at the top and push forward. and that way I can get a nice flat top to my underturn. So let's look at that again. Here is what I would do normally, and then with this tip to accommodate and get rid of that, I will kind of push forward. So you can see why I don't think the alcohol brush markers are really not ideal to letter with, but if you wanted to, you could do so. I would use them probably to color. I would, and oh, there's specialty paper, first of all, I should mention that. You've heard of Copic markers, they're also alcohol-based markers. So you can get specialty Copic alcohol marker paper that it won't bleed through. But again, you know, you're looking for something special and it can be a little bit of a hassle. When I started lettering, I used Sharpies a lot because they had kind of a wow factor. You know, everybody liked them, everybody liked the way their tip behaved, but I would say they're not user-friendly, especially for beginners. It would be fun to use these to letter on a shirt, on clothing, on a backpack, you know, different applications totally. But when it comes to paper, your water-based pens definitely love watercolor paper, especially the juicy ones. And if you want to really make that gradient shine, or you know, the star of your lettering, then I would say with this big tip, go bigger. So let's just finish off with, oh, here's some, I'm trying to reuse all of my paper. So let's use this nice teal and letter something here. Let's just letter mermaid. And I'll try, I'm gonna take it much bigger than I normally would. And I just have to remember, worry about those underturns. Release early so you get that nice gradation. And it's hard for me, honestly. It's hard for me to really make that release because it's not natural to my natural inclination. But when you slow down and focus, even on the ovals, you have to release early, then it will look really beautiful. And I think you can see this coming together like this. All right? Okay, thanks for watching and have some fun with those juicy pens. See you next time.